will start from a global perspective and move all the way down to store level, at every stage remaining focused on the dynamic between desire and require. The world is not shaped by a single demographic story. Instead, it is billions of stories all unfolding at once. We all have different wants and needs, and these can change for us over time. Versatility is crucial in order to keep up with these ever-changing demands. But how do we stay on top of these? How can brands and places react to the speed of change in today's world? Well, we believe that there are 3 essential levers, a trifecta, that goes a long way to making sense of all of those stories. If we deepen our understanding about a consumer's location, age, and affluence, we can begin to grasp not only what consumers want and need, but why. And we can also begin to predict what those will look like in the future. So let's start at a global level. If you look close enough, you can see similarities in what are demographically very different countries. Let's begin by heading to Japan. In Japan, people are increasingly having fewer children, having children later in life, or not having children at all. And this means that the fertility rate is not being met. Last year, their fertility rate hit the lowest it has ever been at 1.15. Now, Japan has the oldest population in the world, with roughly 30% of their population over the age of 65. Now, that's quite significant when the global average is just 10%. But why the focus on Japan? Well, the UK is on a similar trajectory. Next year, the Office of National Statistics predicts that the UK fertility rate will drop down to 1.4. And really, we need it to be over 2 in order for the population to remain stable. So what can we learn from a country that is already there? Older consumers have different wants and needs compared to younger generations. And these are typically associated with accessibility and consumer ease. So shopping, for example, becomes a lot more routine-led, structured, and less impulsive, with older consumers showing a preference for familiar products, trusted brands, and familiar store layouts. With accessibility at the forefront for many older consumers, local accessibility and reliability become essential, making convenience stores an obvious choice. And it's not just how they choose to shop, but also what they choose to purchase. Older consumers' basket sizes are shrinking, and this is reflective of smaller households, mobility constraints, perhaps even less storage now that they've downsized. Older consumers do, however, tend to prioritise higher quality goods, so whilst their basket sizes are smaller, the value is often higher than average. Now, an ageing society doesn't just change the way that consumers behave, it creates tension. An older population can lead to a gap in the workforce. Technology can be implemented to help close that gap. So in Japan, we can see this in self-serve checkouts, robot deliveries, and even completely unmanned stores. However, older populations can be resistant to new technologies, and so it's needed to find that balance between using technology in order to navigate an aging population, but helping that aging population navigate these new technologies. Now, you can also offset falling fertility rates with immigration, with new immigrants helping to fill the people gap. However, in Japan, this has created a bit of a political backlash. So, for a society in a similar predicament to ours, we can see that these tensions are proving quite difficult to solve. We don't have to be experiencing exactly the same challenges to learn something, though. We've seen how Japan has navigated the tensions of an aging population. But could we learn from the flip side of the coin, from a young population? Well, let's head to Nigeria. Now, Nigeria has one of the youngest populations in the world, with over half of people under the age of 30. So this is a completely different demographic challenge. However, there are similarities at both a micro and macro level. So let's consider the average Nigerian consumer. Structure and routine is also important. However, here it is primarily from a financial point of view. Trust is also equally crucial, with Nigerians favouring local sellers who offer fair prices, reliable quality, basically where they know they're not going to get ripped off. Consumers typically shop locally, and whilst to a point, preferring to shop with a familiar trader does play a factor into this decision. For many Nigerians, shopping locally isn't a choice as such. Markets are still quite locally centric, and this is because car ownership is quite low. However, this local market allows sellers to respond instantly to changes in demand and shift their offer in real time. And we can see this in how Nigerians are able to buy products. Their basket sizes are also smaller, again through financial necessity. Some shoppers will even buy what they can afford each day, and this is navigated through the ability to buy single sachet products, for example. So a youthful society, just like an aging one, well, it creates tension. So in Nigeria, there are more people entering the workforce than there are jobs available. And here, technology was also the answer. Nigeria is a fintech leapfrog. They essentially bypassed desktops and laptops and went straight to mobiles, meaning they have one of the most mobile-centric digital populations in the world. But what does this mean? They are an incredibly digitally native population. This was identified by both the Nigerian government and major tech companies who realized that there was a huge pool of talent being underutilized, and this is now being maximized. The government are running technical talent programs aiming to train 3 million people by 2027, and the Nigerian fintech sector is booming, attracting over $2 billion worth of investment in 2024 alone. So like in Japan, technology was the answer. Like Japan, consumers prioritized trust and localism. Like Japan, necessity was the mother of invention. When faced with a consumer-led challenge, businesses in both of these societies have reframed themselves to react to the changing needs and demands of the consumer.
What's becoming clear then is that across countries, consumers are increasingly seeking local. So I'll be quite direct here, but it seems that globalism is dead. Hear me out. I can see the argument of this across both people and products. Starting at products and moving back up now to a worldwide perspective, trade is becoming less frictionless. Think tariff barriers, export controls, sanctions, protests, rising shipping costs. All of these are reshaping global trade and changing consumers' access to goods. Then, on the other side, with people, international travel is changing. Protests, strikes, boycotts, and general uncertainty are all disrupting the movement of people. In 2025, for example, the US saw a 6% decline in its foreign tourism, which is no doubt driven by recent announcements of visa changes, social media vetting, political uncertainty, tariff barriers. Brands are feeling the impact of this too. Disney is already showing concern over falling international visitor numbers. International purchasing is affected too. People are boycotting the US-made brands, with Tesla continuing to see its sales in Europe decrease sharply, although this is often accompanied by other creative forms of protest, such as this bumper sticker. Together, all of these are pointing to a world where global consumption is becoming ever more fragmented, shaped increasingly by politics, ethics, or morals, not just price or simple preference.
Hang on, I think we might need to rewind here. Globalism itself isn't dead, but globalism as we knew it is. Individual markets are having to adapt in different ways. The limitation of the old model of globalism was that everything became the same. Today, the political and economic uncertainty means that every country has to pick its own path, and that pulls countries in different directions, encouraging localism. So trading blocs, for example, are being reshaped, with alliances forming around strategic security, resilience, and defense, rather than purely around economics. And there is a direct hit to consumers too. So we can see it most recently in the escalating US-Iran conflict, which is causing oil prices to surge. This is impacting consumers in various different ways, from filling up our car getting more expensive what feels like every week, to product prices increasing in order to cover rising shipping costs, and eventually it could lead to limitations around product availability. And that word, versatility, pops up again. Global platforms, be it global leaders or brands, need to remain highly versatile, adaptable, and locally attuned to navigate a global landscape that is no longer predictable or even universally aligned and changing by the day?
Well, we've just mentioned that consumers are facing that direct hit, but how can they navigate these constant challenges, tensions, costs, and uncertainty? Well, choice. Choice is what enables us to meet our ever-changing wants and needs. We see this in travel behaviour. Just because people aren't wanting to go to the US doesn't mean that they don't want to travel at all. Last year, global travel was actually up 4% when we know it was down 6% for the US. People are just choosing where they want to go. They still want to go to Disney, however, might look at the cost or the logistics of going to Tokyo, for example, rather than going to Florida. And of course, people are still buying products. They're just doing so with greater selectivity and intent. In Canada, for example, apps have now been created which highlight which products are US made and then provide an alternative instead. Consumption and travel haven't changed, haven't disappeared, they've just become more considered, driven by cost and morals, and to some extent, safety concerns. Remember the tensions that we mentioned earlier? These tensions are created because we have a choice, because consumers' motivations are driven both by their requirements to get a product, but also their desire to get the product that's best for them. Whether you are a brand or a landlord, you need to understand where your consumers are and meet them there on their terms. Let's dig a little deeper into that dynamic. Now, I hope everyone in the audience would agree with me today when I say a necessity that we can't live without is clothing. However, what consumers believe adequately meets that need is far from universal. Consider, for example, a simple white t-shirt. For some, a £5 option from Primark does the job, whereas for others, a £50 option from Hugo Boss might be chosen for its fit, quality, or brand value. In both cases, the white t-shirt here is what's the requirement. However, what differs is the cost that consumers assign to it. Here we have actor Jeremy Allen White from The Bear. He made headlines for wearing this white t-shirt, which is considered quite the high-end product, made by Mersby Schwanen. It retails at around £90 and is made using vintage knitting materials. Now, I'm not going to name any names, but I know for certain that there are people, or at least a person in the audience today, who has been converted to this white t-shirt off the back of watching The Bear. And if you look closely enough, he's even wearing it today. So I'll let you guess who that might be. I, on the other hand, am quite happy with the £15 option from Uniqlo. But what that helps to illustrate is that really consumers' wants and needs are not fixed and they're far from uniform. They vary considerably across consumers or colleagues, and understanding those differences are critical. Earlier on, Kate mentioned the 3 levers that influence consumer purchasing, the trifecta: location, age, and affluence. Understanding how these 3 levers intersect moves you fully towards knowing who your consumers are. So we're going to go through one by one, and let's start with location. We know with our European demographic data that Italians spend 24% of their disposable income on clothing, whereas this only sits at 16% in Germany. So already at quite a macro level, we can see that Italians are more willing to spend bigger on their fashion than their German counterparts. But what about at an individual level? Let's look at 2 shoppers' actual spending habits using our European transactional spend data. For anyone that's unfamiliar with this data set, this is a read of debit and credit card transactions across Europe. And it lets us see what's actually happening, enabling you to understand country-led variances in spending patterns. So our data tells us that in July 2025, a high-income earner living in Monza, which is just northeast of Milan, spent €840 in Prada. Similarly, in the same month, a comparably high earner from Dortmund, Germany, spent merely €320 in Prada. This is just one example, but the pattern that we see time and time again is consistent. Last year, the highest earners in Italy spent on average €1,000 in a single Prada transaction, compared to just 600 in Germany. So same brand, same month, same fashion season, and both high-income earners. The key thing that changed here was location.
The second component of the trifecta is age. Now, unlike clothing, which is a clear necessity, streaming services sadly aren't, despite how much we try to convince ourselves and our bank accounts otherwise. But adoption tells a slightly different story. Roughly 60% of UK households now have a Netflix subscription alone. So, are streaming services therefore being seen as an essential, a requirement, a thing that we desire? Well, I think they could be. Major television shows are increasingly being released exclusively on streaming platforms, with examples including Wednesday, Stranger Things, and Squid Game, which I bet many have watched, even if it was just one episode. Now, these shows are huge cultural drivers, and so streaming subscriptions are becoming more than just about entertainment. They're about participation. People don't want to feel left out of the conversation. But what does the data show? Well, once a quarter, we run a Voice of the Nation survey, which asks 2,000 nationally representative people a range of questions across a variety of different topics. And in our most recent survey at the beginning of the year, we asked their opinions on non-negotiable versus luxury monthly spending. 35% of people view streaming services as a non-negotiable monthly expenditure. And this sentiment is seen strongest amongst our younger generations, with over 40% of millennials and Gen Z agreeing. But streaming services weren't always this popular. Believe it or not, there was even a time before they existed. So enter the TV license. Once a staple household expenditure, it is now increasingly being seen as optional. Last year, 3.6 million UK households declared that they no longer require one. And a key driver of this shift is generational. Now, I will hold my hand up and I will say that I don't have a TV license. And before anyone reports me, I don't watch live TV, and I will happily sacrifice shows only shown on BBC or iPlayer, which, yes, does mean that I did not watch The Traitors. I just don't view a TV license as a necessary purchase. I have Netflix and Disney Plus, and I will wait for terrestrial TV shows to go up on demand. And if I really want to watch something live or on iPlayer, I'll go to my parents' house. Now, speaking of my parents, they're not in the room, so they won't hear me call them the older generation, although they would absolutely want me to preface they're not yet old enough for a free TV license. But for them, they do view a TV license as a requirement. And we've chatted about it. I've told them they've got every streaming service under the sun. Surely they don't need a TV license as well. And their genuine response was, well, no, because we like to have This Morning on with our breakfast. You know we love a quiz show. And then we have to watch the news at 6. So for them, it is a non-negotiable. Not only is it familiar, they've always had one, but they spend a lot more time at home than I do. And so it is a necessity, more of a necessity for them than it is for me. So the younger generation, me, well, we're far more likely to spend money in the pub, for example, socialising with our friends outside of the house. So streaming services are just one example of this shift in channel behaviour. This shift towards online engagement is visible across many sectors, with the UK leading the charge, holding the highest share of online retail in Europe. So it's time to talk about the third component of our trifecta, affluence. Affluence influences not only which brands people choose to buy with, but how they choose to engage with them. So at CACI, we build Acorn. It's a demographic segmentation tool that will be familiar to many of you in the room today, and it categorises the population by affluence and life stage, based on their postcode. So it really is at the heart of our trifecta. I'm going to use Acorn in my example of how affluence influences purchases, and I'll be anchoring it alongside a brand we all know, particularly in this room, Gant. So 16% of the UK population fall within these Acorn groups here, our most affluent demographics. Last year, 45% of Gant sales were from customers within these groups, so 16% of the population. The remaining 55% of Gant sales were from customers within these Acorn groups. As you can see, it's not an even split in demographics. So we can understand from this that affluent consumers are more likely to buy with Gantt. But remember, we said that affluence influences not only where people buy, but also how. So these 5 acorn groups here on the left, our most affluent consumers, are twice as likely to physically shop in store in Gantt compared with those on the right. Now, there are several factors behind this. We can't ignore the influence of a store's location. So Gantt will open near where they know their customers shop, which in turn encourages this view that Gantt is a necessary purchase. I mean, if you look around during the coffee break, I'm sure you'll see at least one person wearing a quarter zip this afternoon. However, for less affluent shoppers, convenience doesn't necessarily come from having a store nearby. Driven more by cost, less affluent shoppers will be checking out the sales, seeking out the bargains, and I don't know about you, but I find it so much easier and less disappointing to do so online. So we can see here that shoppers with the same brand crave different shopping experiences, and this is influenced by their affluence.
And that's the trifecta. Consumers' wants and needs are shaped by a combination of their location, their age, and their affluence. Predicting consumer behaviour is never straightforward. It requires a balance of art and science, blending qualitative insight with quantitative evidence. Understanding this trifecta, however, can help to begin to build a clear picture of what consumers desire and require. We'll explore what this means for you in greater detail this afternoon, but first, we'd like to introduce Amanda and Ben from One Retail to the stage, who will share just how important it is understanding consumer nuances in helping drive commercial decisions.